Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be tackling a pretty big name in philosophy, Immanuel Kant.
Oh, yeah. He's a big one.
His ideas are, they're still shaping how we think centuries later. It's really pretty incredible.
Definitely still relevant. Yeah.
Our listeners interested in learning more about Kant's impact. And luckily for us, we've got some excerpts from a book about Kant's philosophy to kind of guide us through this deep dive.
Oh, sounds good.
Now, I know Kant can be, a little bit dense.
Yeah.
Like trying to climb a mountain of pure reason.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
But don't worry, we're here to make sure you reach the summit with all your brain cells intact.
And to really get a grasp on Kant's influence, I think we need to understand the philosophical landscape he was kind of navigating at the time.
Yeah, and I think our source actually does a fantastic job of setting the stage with this brilliant analogy.
Oh, okay.
So picture this, okay? It's like a classic Charlie Chaplin movie scene. You've got a boy, he's just accidentally smashed a window, and who should conveniently appear but the little tramp himself, ready to offer his, shall we say, repair services.
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
David Hume is our window-smashing boy.
Exactly.
And Kant is the resourceful tramp.
Exactly. Hume, like that mischievous kid, he just shattered that window of traditional philosophical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
He poked holes in all those comfy assumptions about how we know things for sure, and it left quite a mess behind.
Yeah. Yeah. And Kant's like, hold on, I can fix this.
Yeah.
Offering a new perspective, a way to repair the damage.
Exactly.
Our source even goes on to compare Hume to the Impressionists,
Yeah.
capturing those fleeting perceptions, while Kant is more like Cézanne, adding structure and depth.
I love that. That's such a vivid way to understand their different approaches.
Yeah.
But how does this relate to Kant's famous Copernican revolution in thinking? Copernicus was all about astronomy, right?
Right, but the core idea is the same. It's like this radical shift in perspective. Copernicus showed us that we revolve around the sun, not the other way around. And similarly, Kant argued that the mind doesn't passively reflect reality. It actively shapes our understanding of it.
So it's not just a mirror reflecting the world, but more like a powerful lens, shaping what we see.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's almost like our minds come preloaded with this certain software, inherent concepts and ways of perceiving that actually structure our entire experience of reality.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting, to me at least. Kant was really obsessed with these three fundamental questions, I guess you could call them. What can I know? What should I do? What may I hope? And all of these, as our source points out, boil down to one overarching question, really, which is, what is man?
Deep stuff.
Deep stuff.
And in this deep dive, we're going to be focusing on those first two, Kant's theory of knowledge and his ethics. But before we jump into those, revolutionary ideas, I think it's important to talk about the thinkers who kind of laid the groundwork for Kant.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Kant didn't develop these ideas in a vacuum. He was really deeply influenced by some intellectual giants.
Yeah.
Like Newton, Hume, and Rousseau.
It's funny how Hume is both the problem and part of the solution in this whole story.
Well, Kant himself said that Hume's skepticism kind of woke him from his dogmatic slumber. He was forced to confront these flaws in the traditional ways of thinking about knowledge.
So Hume shakes things up, and then Kant comes in and tries to rebuild on a firmer foundation.
Exactly, yeah. And he agreed with Hume that experience is essential for knowledge, but he argued that our minds play a more active role than Hume gave him credit for.
So it's not just passively receiving information through our senses, we're also actively organizing it and interpreting that information based on some kind of mental framework.
Exactly, yeah. And that's actually where Rousseau comes in. He adds another layer.
Rousseau, the champion of individual freedom, social contracts, right? What influence did H.E. have on Kant?
He sparked Kant's interest in morality and the fate of humanity.
Interesting.
So it pulled him out of this purely theoretical philosophy and into grappling with the question of what we ought to do.
Gotcha. So he was building on these different thinkers, taking what resonated with him, but also forging his own unique path, I guess you could say. And to really fully understand that path, we need to unpack some of his key ideas.
Okay.
Starting with this intriguing concept of types of judgments.
Okay.
It sounds like some kind of philosophical sorting hat,
Good analogy.
categorizing different statements.
Yeah, he created this system to figure out what kind of knowledge we can truly rely on. So he distinguished between two main types of judgments: analytic and synthetic.
Okay.
Analytic judgments are those where the predicate is already contained in the subject.
Okay.
Like, all bachelors are unmarried.
Okay, so those are like self-evident truths. No need for a head count of all the bachelors out there to confirm it.
Exactly. Then you have synthetic judgments. These add new information about the world. So like, the sky is blue.
Okay, so you have to look beyond the definition itself to see if it's actually true.
Yeah.
You need evidence from experience.
Yeah, you need evidence. Now, Kant also made another crucial distinction between a priori and a posteriori knowledge.
All right, bring it on. Let's get into the weeds.
Okay, so a priori knowledge is independent of experience. It's true regardless of what we observe in the world. So like mathematical truths, 2 + 2 = 4.
Okay, got it. It's like the foundation of math is unshakable,
Right.
no matter what your senses are telling you. And then a posteriori knowledge comes from, our experiences,
Yeah,
our observations of the world.
Precisely. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Kant argued that there's this special type of knowledge called synthetic a priori knowledge.
Okay, that sounds like a very, very exclusive philosophical club. What makes it so special?
It's knowledge that is both synthetic,
Okay.
meaning it gives us new information about the world, and a priori, meaning it's necessarily true independent of experience. It's like having your philosophical cake and eating it too.
Whoa. So it's telling us something new about the world, but it's also inherently true.
Yeah.
That's pretty mind-blowing.
It is, yeah. And this leads us to another crucial distinction in Kant's philosophy: phenomena versus noumena.
All right, bring on the next set of philosophical categories.
Okay, so phenomena are things as we experience them, right? Shaped by our senses and the structures of our minds.
So not necessarily the world as it truly is in some kind of objective sense.
Exactly. Noumena, on the other hand, are things in themselves.
Okay.
They are the reality that exists independent of our perception. And Kant argued that we can never truly know noumena because our minds are always shaping our experience.
It's kind of like acknowledging that there's a world beyond the matrix, even if we can never fully access it. We're trapped in the matrix of our own mind, so to speak.
That's a great analogy. This distinction is fundamental to understanding Kant's view of the limits of human knowledge. We're always working with phenomena, the world filtered through our minds.
So how does this all tie back to the structure of our minds? You mentioned something about faculties earlier.
Yes. So Kant proposed that 3 faculties kind of work together to produce knowledge, sensibility, understanding, and reason.
Okay, break that down for me. What does each of those faculties do?
Sensibility is all our raw sense data, right? The information we receive through our 5 senses. But here's the catch. Kant argues that even our senses operate through space and time,
Okay.
which are not properties of the external world, but rather inherent structures of our minds.
Wait, so space and time are in our heads? Yeah. That's kind of a wild thought.
Yeah, and that's a key part of the Kantian revolution. Then there's understanding. This faculty takes the raw data from our senses and applies concepts to it, helping us make sense of the world. And Kant believed that we have certain innate concepts, which he called categories, that structure our understanding.
So like built-in mental software,
Yeah,
that helps us categorize and organize the world around us.
exactly. And finally, we have reason. This faculty strives for these ultimate explanations, seeking to understand the universe as a whole, right? It deals with these big ideas like God, the soul, meaning of life.
So reason is the part of us that seeks to connect the dots, right? Find those overarching patterns and principles that govern reality.
Yes. However, Kant also cautioned that reason can go astray when it tries to go beyond the realm of experience, venturing into areas where we lack that concrete evidence.
So reason is a powerful tool, but it needs to stay in its lane.
That's a great way to put it. This emphasis on the limits of reason is central to his entire philosophy.
Yeah.
And it's going to play a key role as we move into exploring his ethics.
Which is exactly where we're headed next, because Kant didn't just want to, redefine how we think about knowledge. He also wanted to revolutionize how we think about morality.
It's going to get interesting.
It is, yeah. It's going to get maybe a little controversial, but we're going to dive into all of that in the next part of our deep dive. Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we're spelunking through the caverns of Immanuel Kant's mind.
Still spelunking.
Last time we explored his Copernican revolution in thinking,
Right.
how he shifted our whole perspective on knowledge, and how our minds actively shape what we know. Pretty mind-bending stuff.
Yeah, it certainly challenges some long-held assumptions. And that revolutionary spirit continues as we turn to Kant's ethics.
Okay.
His ideas about how we ought to act in the world.
I'm ready to explore the moral maze.
Let's do it.
But before we do, I think a quick recap for our listener is in order. We learned that Kant wasn't satisfied with just simply, reflecting reality.
Right.
He believed our minds are actively structuring and interpreting it, through these innate concepts he called categories.
Right. And this emphasis on the mind's active role really sets the stage for his ethical theory.
Okay.
Kant didn't believe morality was about following rules, handed down from some external authority, like divine commandments or societal norms.
So no blind obedience for Kant.
No, not at all. He argued that true morality stems from reason itself. So instead of asking what will make me happy or what does God command, Kant's ethics center on this question: what can I rationally will to be a universal law?
That's a pretty radical shift in perspective.
It is.
So instead of focusing on consequences or external authorities, it's about, finding those moral principles that could apply to anyone, anywhere.
Exactly.
Regardless of their, personal beliefs or desires.
Exactly. It's about uncovering those universal moral truths that hold true for all rational beings. And this leads us to Kant's very famous moral test, the categorical imperative.
Ah, yes, the categorical imperative.
Big one.
It sounds so serious, so absolute. What does it actually mean?
Well, think of it as a tool for evaluating the morality of our actions. One way to understand it is through this principle of universalizability.
Okay.
Basically, you ask yourself, could I rationally want everyone to act this way?
So if I'm thinking about doing something, I should pause and consider, would it be okay if everyone else did this? It's kind of like that golden rule, do unto others.
Yeah, but Kant's approach is even more rigorous.
Okay.
It's not just about avoiding harm to others. It's about the underlying principle of your action.
Okay.
So our source gives us this really helpful example: the lying promise.
I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Okay, so imagine you need to borrow money, right?
Uh-huh.
And you promise to repay it even though you know you can't.
Okay, been there.
Kant would argue that this is wrong, not just because it harms the lender,
Right.
but because it violates this principle of truthfulness. If everyone made lying promises would lose all meaning.
Yeah, right. No one would trust anyone anymore. The whole system would break down.
Exactly. And that's the point of the categorical imperative. It forces us to think beyond the immediate consequences of our actions and to consider the broader implications of our choices.
Mm-hmm.
If a principle can't be universalized without contradicting itself, then it's not a morally sound principle.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. But there's another formulation of the categorical imperative, right?
Sure is, yeah.
Something about treating people as ends in themselves.
You're exactly right. The second formulation emphasizes respect for humanity. It states, treat people as ends in themselves, never merely as means to an end.
Don't just use people to get what you want. Recognize their inherent worth and dignity.
Precisely. So for instance, exploiting someone's labor for your own profit without fair compensation, that would be treating them merely as a means to your own financial gain.
It's about acknowledging the inherent value of every person, regardless of, their social status or usefulness to us.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. And this idea was revolutionary, especially in Kant's time.
Yeah.
When social hierarchies were so rigid, it's a cornerstone of modern human rights and ethical thinking.
It's incredibly thought-provoking, all of this. But it makes me wonder, how does Kant's view of morality connect to his broader philosophical system? That's
a great question. And remember those three driving questions, behind all of Kant's work?
Yeah.
What can I know? What should I do?
Yeah.
And perhaps most intriguingly, what may I hope?
Yes, we've explored the first two quite a bit.
Yeah.
But how does this idea of hope fit into Kant's ethics?
Well, this is where Kant's ideas about morality and religion kind of intersect. And it might surprise you. Remember how he rejected traditional metaphysics, That idea that we can have certain knowledge of things beyond our experience.
Yeah, he was all about staying within the bounds of reason and experience.
Exactly. Well, he applied that same skepticism to religious doctrines based solely on authority or revelation.
So no blind faith for Kant.
Well, Not exactly. He didn't reject the possibility of God or an immortal soul. Instead, he kind of flipped the script.
Okay.
He argued that our very capacity for morality, our innate sense of right and wrong, points to the possibility of a higher moral order.
So instead of basing morality on religion, he's suggesting that morality itself might be evidence for something beyond this material world. That's a pretty bold move.
It is a bold move. He argued that, the fact that we feel obligated to do the right thing, even when it's hard,
Yeah.
even when it goes against our self-interest, implies that there's some ultimate purpose to morality, some larger moral framework at play in the universe.
So our moral compass, our sense of ought, is hinting at something bigger than ourselves.
That's one way to interpret it. He called these beliefs postulates of practical reason.
Okay.
They're not provable in a scientific sense, but they are necessary for our moral lives to have ultimate meaning and significance.
It's almost like our moral striving is a kind of faith, not a blind faith based on dogma,
Right.
but a faith that's grounded in the very structure of our rational minds.
That's a very insightful way to put it, and it leads us to another fascinating aspect of Kant's ethics, the idea of the noumenal self.
Okay.
Remember that distinction between phenomena, the world as we experience it, and noumena, the world as it is in itself.
Yeah, it's like we're always looking through a tinted lens, never quite grasping, reality directly.
Well, Kant applied this distinction to our very selves. He argued that we have a phenomenal self, the self we experience through our senses and desires, and a noumenal self, a deeper, truer self that's the source of our moral freedom.
So there's more to us than meets the eye. There's like this hidden dimension of our being that transcends our everyday experience.
Precisely. And this noumenal self is not bound by the same laws of nature as our phenomenal self.
Okay.
And it's in this realm, Kant argues, that true moral freedom resides.
Wow. That's a powerful and somewhat mysterious concept. It really raises a lot of questions about the nature of free will and the relationship between our minds and the physical world.
It certainly does. And to see how these, abstract ideas play out in the real world, we're actually going to explore some really fascinating examples in the final part of our deep dive, drawing on films that grapple with these Kantian themes.
I can't wait. Stay tuned, listeners. We're about to enter the world of Kantian cinema.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been, exploring this vast and intricate world of Immanuel Kant, a philosopher who really shook things up with his ideas about knowledge, reason, morality.
Yeah. And in this final part, we're going to see how those, abstract ideas, those grand philosophical pronouncements, how they actually play out in the messy, complicated drama of human experience.
Yeah. Because let's be honest, sometimes it's hard to connect those lofty philosophical concepts to our everyday lives.
Right.
But that's what I love about our source, is that it bridges that gap by using these examples from films. Showing us how Kant's ideas manifest in these stories that we can all relate to.
Yeah, it's a brilliant way to make these complex ideas come alive.
Yeah.
And one film that I think really beautifully illustrates Kant's concept of the noumenal self is Akira Kurosawa's masterpiece, Ikiru.
Ikiru, or To Live.
Live.
Such a powerful and moving film.
But it is.
For those who haven't seen it, it tells the story of Kanji Watanabe.
Right.
This middle-aged bureaucrat who's really just been, sleepwalking through life, just going through the motions. Mm-hmm. And then he receives a devastating diagnosis. Terminal cancer.
It's that classic existential crisis, facing your own mortality.
Right.
And suddenly realizing you haven't truly lived.
Yeah.
And Watanabe is confronted with this profound question, what is the meaning of life?
Right.
What have I done with my time on this earth?
And what's so compelling is that, Watanabe doesn't turn to religion or seek out some grand philosophical answer.
Right.
He just starts acting, differently.
Yeah, he breaks free from this bureaucratic cage and just dedicates himself to this seemingly simple but deeply meaningful task.
Yeah.
Building a playground for children in his community.
It's such a poignant, transformation.
Oh, Jesus.
And through a Kantian lens, we can see that Watanabe's actions are not driven by self-interest,
right?
Or the pursuit of happiness. He's not trying to maximize pleasure in his remaining days.
No.
Instead he's aligning himself with this this moral principle.
Yes.
The inherent worth of human life.
Yeah.
And the importance of, contributing to the common good.
Absolutely.
So it's about acting out of duty, but not a duty that's imposed from the outside.
Right.
It's more like a duty that arises from a deeper understanding of his own humanity.
Yes.
And his connection to others.
Well, got it. It's about acting in accordance with his noumenal self.
Yeah.
That part of him that recognizes and respects that moral law, that an innate sense of ought that Kant believed was fundamental to our being.
Yeah, it's like his true self is emerging from the shadows of, his ordinary mundane existence.
Yeah.
And it's through acting on that deeper sense of self that he finally finds meaning and purpose. And it's a beautiful example of how confronting our mortality can actually awaken our moral potential.
It really is. And it highlights that tension between our, phenomenal self, the self caught up in the world of appearances and desires, and then our noumenal self, that self that's capable of transcending those limitations and acting in accordance with that higher moral purpose. That tension is at the heart of Kant's ethics.
Now, on a slightly darker note, our source also discusses Woody Allen's film, Crimes and Misdemeanors.
Right.
Which offers a different perspective on Kantian ethics. What happens when someone actually chooses to violate that categorical imperative.
Right.
To prioritize their own self-interest, over moral principles.
Crimes and Misdemeanors is it's a fascinating, though unsettling exploration of guilt and morality and the consequences of choosing that easy way out. So the film centers on Judah Rosenthal, a successful ophthalmologist who's having an affair.
Yeah.
And when his mistress threatens to expose him, he contemplates having her murdered.
I've got a moral dilemma.
It's a classic Kantian scenario, right? Judah knows rationally that murder is wrong.
Yeah.
It violates the categorical imperative. He can't universalize murder as a principle of action. And yet he's tempted by self-preservation.
Yeah.
This desire to protect his comfortable life, his reputation, everything he's built.
So he's torn between his phenomenal self, driven by fear and self-interest.
Right.
And his noumenal self, which recognizes the moral law, the absolute wrongness of taking a human life.
Exactly. And in the end, he chooses to act in accordance with his phenomenal self.
Right.
He arranges for the murder of his mistress.
It's a chilling reminder that we don't always live up to our own moral ideals. That sometimes, fear and self-preservation can override our conscience.
Yeah. And the film doesn't shy away from the psychological consequences of Judah's choice.
Right.
While he escapes legal punishment, he's haunted by guilt, plagued by these nightmares, unable to escape the knowledge of what he's done. He might have preserved his outward life, but his inner life it's shattered.
It's like he's lost touch with his own, moral center, his noumenal self. He might have gained the world, but he's lost his soul.
And that speaks to Kant's idea that true freedom is found in aligning our actions with the moral law.
Yeah.
When we violate that law, even if we get away with it externally, we damage ourselves internally.
Yeah.
We create this rift within our own being.
Yeah. These films provide such powerful illustrations of Kant's ideas, playing out in human lives, with all their complexities and moral ambiguities. And they raise these questions that I think are still relevant today.
Yeah.
Especially as science delves, deeper into the workings of our minds. And can we still hold on to this distinction between the phenomenal and the noumenal in a world where neuroscience is mapping out the brain?
Right.
Showing us the neural correlates of our decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the provocative question our source leaves us with. It's something Kant himself grappled with. He was deeply concerned about the potential for science to overstep its bounds, to try to reduce morality to mere brain chemistry.
So where does that leave us?
Yeah.
Are we just biological machines? Are actions predetermined by our neurons, or is there something more?
Well, I think Kant would argue that even if science can map out every neuron and synapse in our brains, it still wouldn't fully explain that feeling of ought.
Yeah.
That sense of moral duty that seems to transcend our physical existence. The mystery remains.
And then perhaps that mystery is what makes us human. Kant, even centuries later, compels us to keep asking these questions.
Yeah.
About who we are, about the nature of knowledge, morality, and freedom.
Yeah, he reminds us that we're not just passive observers of the world, but active participants in creating meaning and value. And that true freedom isn't about doing whatever we want, but about choosing to act in accordance with principles that we can rationally will to be universal laws.
Yeah, it's a challenging but ultimately inspiring vision of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And that's what makes exploring Kant, even with all his complexities and challenges, it's so worthwhile. So to our listener, we encourage you to keep diving into Kant's ideas and see how they resonate with your own experiences and your own understanding of the world.
This has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us.